Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation upon whose ancestral lands our city campus now stands. I would also like to pay respects to the elders, both past and present, acknowledging them as traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. Now, just before we get started, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that we will be recording this session, and that by taking part in today's session, you'll be consenting to this recording being made publicly available. We're not going to be referring to you by name or anything like that, but we may be referring to some of the questions that you have. Okay, so who am I? My name is John Elliott, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at UTS Business School. And joining me today are two of my academic colleagues. So we have Associate Professor Hussain Ramal, who's the Director of the MBA program. We have Dr. Deborah Colton, who's the Director of both the Master of Finance and Master of Financial Analysis programs. And also joining me today is Courtney O'Regan, who is studying the MBA with us at the moment. So welcome to all of you today. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in. You can see the little Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. So once the presentation's over, we'll answer those questions that have been submitted. We have allowed a bit of time for Q&A, so we'll definitely get to your questions. Now, being an online event, there might be some technical issues. If there are, hopefully we'll be able to resolve them quickly. If at any point you find you're not able to access this webinar, just do the tried and tested log in, log back, log out, log back in again, as that usually resolves these sorts of issues. So you're all here to find out about how how learning is still happening during COVID-19. So I would just like to sort of share with you that what we're doing has been to fully support the government's efforts to slow down the spread of COVID-19, and we've introduced a lot of social distancing measures into our teaching and learning to help flatten that curve. Now, for UTS has never actually officially closed when this plan has been implemented, and critical services and spaces have always been available for staff and students. And we're initiating a sort of safe return to campus with phase 1 happening on the 26th of July. But for those of you who are looking at joining us in spring, what this means is that most of our subjects will be taught online, with the exception of maybe some that require specialist facilities and everything. But this is a really fluid situation, so this might change at any point. So without further ado, I think what we're going to focus on now is how it's been going, rather than what it might look like, because we just don't know what spring and everything will bring us. So my first question to my fellow panelists is actually to you, Courtney, and that's it. Firstly, just tell us a bit about yourself and what you're studying, and then tell us how your experience has been so far as a student with us.
Great, thanks, John. So I'm Courtney. I'm currently about halfway through my MBA and I'm majoring in HR. So I'm working full-time in an admin role and I'm studying part-time. I started studying the MBA because I wasn't sure exactly what field of business I was interested in. So I've been doing the part-time load, normally about 2 subjects per semester, which has been really good for me. Most of them have been evening classes or a couple of Saturdays in block mode. This semester they've been Saturdays in block mode, which has been really great. Yeah, so I started my MBA at the beginning of 2018 and I started with just 1 semester first up, 1 subject in the first semester, and then I've kind of eased into it, but I found it really interesting that I could do 1 accounting subject, 1 finance, 1 economics and HR. And so I'm majoring in HR and I've just been doing HR subjects this semester.
And have you found since the whole sort of lockdown thing started, Have you reduced your study load or kept it the same? Or have
I
you...
did. I actually reduced my study load this semester. So I started off, I was enrolled in the 12 credit points, which is the regular part-time load. But then I reduced it to 6 credit points because I got a new role at work and it was just a bit hectic with the all the COVID complications. And so, yeah, I reduced my study load and it's been really good. I'm really glad I did that, but it's been great.
And there was no dramas in reducing the load or anything like that? Like you
No, not at all. You've got until about week 4 or week 5 of semester to drop a subject. So that wasn't a problem at all. I did the full load for the first couple of weeks, and then I realised I just needed to reduce it a bit. So yeah, it was no problem at all.
And what if you missed the most under at least regarding study? Do you miss your fellow students? How are you staying in contact with them?
I've missed I guess it's the connection when you go into class and you're in a classroom and you get that face-to-face connection. I've missed that with people, but I've stayed in contact, you know, when I've needed to collaborate on projects or something, stayed in contact via email or via Teams or, you know, just, you know, as you would for any kind of project. But yeah, I guess I've missed the face-to-face connection for sure.
And your classes, you said they're on Saturdays.
Yes.
So it's easy to sort of be like you just log in and you turn up, you're turning up to your classes as though you would be turning up to university.
Yeah, that's right. So mine were on block mode in Saturdays. So basically like a Saturday, it was 9:30 till 12. So kind of a Saturday morning block modes. And it was great the way it was structured. Everyone would Zoom in, the teacher would give like basically a mini lecture, then break us up into little groups. So in breakout rooms in Zoom, and then we'd have to work on activities and then come back together as a group and talk about what we discussed. It worked really well. Yeah.
Okay. So pretty much like the way it was face to face, but just sort of digitally instead.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually liked it better digitally because when you break up into breakout rooms on Zoom, you get thrown into a room with, you know, 3 other people and you meet them and you get to, I don't know, I feel like I got to talk to more people than I would have in a classroom, because in a classroom, you just basically talk to the people you're sitting next to. Whereas this, I don't know, I feel like I got to meet more people for sure.
Excellent. And how has group work been going? Has that been easy or harder?
Do you know, like last year when we were doing face-to-face classes with group work, we only would actually meet once or twice over the semester in real life to talk about a project. But so most of group work generally is, you know, via online channels anyway, through a Google Doc or like a shared document or, so it actually hasn't been that different. I've found a couple, maybe 2 less face-to-face meetings, but otherwise pretty similar for me.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Courtney. Now, Hussein, you're like a lot of our academics have pivoted fairly quickly towards online teaching. What has been the biggest challenge to your to the way you've delivered on learning?
Thank you, John. It's great to follow on from what Courtney has said, because that just validates what we're doing is working. I think the biggest challenge has been to provide the same experience that you would have on campus, but in a virtual situation. So I've said this previously as well. We still want to provide a face-to-face experience, even though it may be virtual. So part of what we've done there is to use technologies that we weren't familiar with previously or had not used previously in teaching. So Zoom was one that we had not used previously. Microsoft Teams we had. So we've used a combination of technologies to try and come up with an experience that's similar. So you can see on the screen, what we did for lectures, for example, was to pre-record some of the lectures where there's examples, like on the top part of the screen, you can see Sony with PlayStation, and we recorded how it went through a journey when Nintendo and Sony worked together and broke off, and that's how PlayStation came. So we would pre-record that, students can watch that, and then we'd have Zoom lectures as well. That's the second half of the screen you can see where I'm there, the lecture, and you can see the students are there as well. And the lectures themselves continue on from what we've done in the classroom on campus, which is to provide a very practical hands-on experience. So you can see on the next screen, it shows you what it looks like when we are actually giving a lecture. So you can see the speaker, that's me in this part of the video on the top right of the screen. And we are talking about the trade in services in the subject I cover, which is global strategic management. So we provide all the lecture slides in advance on the website, but during the lecture, we'll go through some examples to say how to apply it. So you can see things like where it says on the screen, click here. We've been encouraging students, if they've got two screens open, to try that during the lecture to get some practice on it. And on the next screen, you can see that here's a student during the lecture asking questions. So that interaction is ongoing, even in this online virtual environment. And I'd say one of the good things that has come up, and it's coincided with what's happened this year, is we've moved through a new learning management system, and that's Canvas. So on the next screen, you can see this is the Canvas website. And when you enter for each subject, there's a website set up on Canvas, and it tells the students what the expectations are. It tells you about the teaching staff, how to be successful. And there's also expectations, what you can expect from us as the academics and the university, and what we would expect from you in terms of progressing and how we can assist that. And it's quite structured, so it provides you clarity before the semester begins and continues throughout the semester. So on the next slide, for example, you can see just 1 week. I've just taken an example of a week, which was week 2 or module 2, as we would call it. And you can see that there's an overview, there's the PowerPoint slides, and then there's tutorial information for Zoom for that week. The lecture recording is there. The tutorial slides are there, and the tutorial recording is there. So even if you wanted to go back and go through the material that was covered, it's all been recorded, and it allows you to go through and catch up if the need be. And if we go further on the next slide, you'll see the weekly overview is very structured. It tells you what will be covered during the week. It says about the readings, what should be read this week from the textbook, and what will be the case study that we will cover in class. So again, that practical application that we're very proud of at UTS, we continue that even in the online environment. So as Courtney mentioned, those breakout rooms, they're fantastic because we use them during tutorials as well to put students in smaller groups and allocate them some tasks so that they can work together. So it allows for this larger group discussion, but also smaller, more intimate discussions between group members where they can brainstorm and come up with new ideas. Now that interaction goes even beyond the lectures and tutorials. So if we go to the next slide, as I was showing you earlier in the lecture, we were covering that trade internationally in services. That topic went on very detailed, and there were questions more about how can we actually apply this more in the day-to-day operations of our organizations. To do that, we created on the learning management system on Canvas this practice exercise. And you can see on the next slide, the practice exercise tells you, it gives a scenario. It says, like, imagine you're doing management consulting and you want to look at what are the restrictions on service for international service providers, and a few examples given. And what we would do is, again, provide guidance and guide you through to how the solutions could be found. So on the next slide, you'd see, again, it tells you to click here, gives you the website, it mentions that this was covered in the lecture. And then on the next slide, there's again more detailed guidance of how to choose countries, how to choose sectors, what needs to be done. And this continues on the next slide, where you can find how these things actually work. So an example is given, and then you can apply for the other countries to see how this works. And you can refer to the lecture to see how this is interpreted. Beyond that, we also have set up quizzes on the learning management system where students can go and check how they're progressing. This is not part of the formal assessment. So they're not marked in the final grade, but something for students to just check and see how they're progressing. This is something we brought in new, and it was partly to make sure that students felt that, yes, they weren't falling behind, and if so, they would seek appropriate help. Where students were feeling that they needed to have more interaction and discussions on a one-on-one basis rather than in lectures or tutorials, we used technology like Microsoft Teams. So on the next slide, you can see the Microsoft Teams area where students would contact and say, would like to have a chat, sometimes sharing their files, and we could talk about what they've done for their assessment. Video chats were very popular, so we would have that pre-video chat about what the discussion will be about, and then to move it further. And on the next slide, you can see, and I'll wrap this up with just a couple more examples. Next slide, going back to the learning management system, the discussion board, we found this was used quite a lot. We would bring in examples, one of them being the pandemic, which we're going through, the effect of that on the foreign direct investment around the world. And you can see on the next slide, I provided a link to a story that the United Nations had done on the effects of it. And you can see in the very next slide that there's been a lot of interaction from students, and some of them been sharing reports that even I hadn't read in detail. So this was a great interactive experience for me. So I think we've managed to replicate much of what we would do on campus in a virtual environment.
Excellent. Now, Hussein, the move over to Canvas, that was going to happen regardless of COVID-19, wasn't it?
Yes, so that was quite a coincidence that we moved towards the new system at the start of this year for the postgraduate programs. And just using it, we found it to be quite easy and smooth to incorporate more technology.
Yeah. Now, I'm conscious that for some of our viewers today who are here, the practice of us having our video can be really useful for them. So I'm actually going to turn my video on so you can see there's me. Hopefully this will improve that aspect as well. But another thing that a key area of something that UTS has always been known for is engagement with industry. And Deb, do you want to talk to us a bit about how industry has how we've still managed to maintain that engagement despite the lockdown?
Did you want me to have my video on? Because I can't put mine
on. I'll just transfer to that now. Give me 1 second. And go back to.
So I'll just start talking beforehand. So I'm Deb Cotton, and I'm the Director of the Master of Finance and Master of Financial Analysis. And we've always used industry connections a large amount in our subjects because they really make a very big difference to the connection between you as a student and you as a future practitioner in finance. So we've really focused quite a lot on that throughout our degree, undergraduate and postgraduate degrees as well. And so really, I think we've been able to continue this really well because everybody's working in this kind of same lockdown thing that you were talking about, and Hussein was talking about as well. So what we've got here on the video, so I don't know if you can see that yet. So that's, this is in one of our subjects, Finance for Entrepreneurs. And I'll put that on for a little bit and then I'll talk again.
Thanks for chucking me the easy one there, Liz.
You know, it's my style, you know.
Yeah. Where do I begin?
All right. So, students, say hello to James Stewart. So James is a good friend of mine. So we started out because being friends because I had just built my platform for my catering business, and I got a $4,000 order through, and went, oh, holy moly! Like, what business is this? And it was a business called Aussie Commerce. And at the time, James was the CEO of that business. And he had recommended me to the admin to use the service. I hadn't even met him yet. And he had already gotten me a $4,000 order. So we've been friends ever since.
I was going to say $4,000 is a superb investment, frankly.
It was the best $4,000 that other business ever spent.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can vouch that the food was delicious.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely delicious.
Thank you. So what I'll do is, you're the first guest speaker we've had on our virtual classroom here. So this will be a fun experiment. So what I'll do is I will share my screen because I have your slides up. And then when you want me, because I can obviously have all the audio, so when you want me to change them, let me know. Students, if you have any questions as we go, James is happy to answer them. So just put them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on it so that, I can, you can answer, you can ask any questions and we can do it that way. Okay? All right, well, I will hand it over to James. So you talked a little bit, James, about, so you had worked at the manufacturing plant. Did you just want to quickly talk a little bit more about your career projections?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, sure. So I'll keep it short. So I went to business school at a place called INSEAD.
So we do have a question. So how are startups doing in the current climate?
Oh, that is.
So Deb, is this a typical example of how we would use like our connections? Are they happy to come in and engage like this?
Yeah, and in fact, in some ways, I think it's even easier, John, in the current situation, because rather than them having to take, probably an hour or two out of their day to kind of get to us, come into the classroom, and, go back to work, whatever it might happen to be, they're able to do this just, in literally half an hour. They just sit down. They're already often working from home and using Zoom, so it's not very difficult. The lecturer in this particular one here is actually an entrepreneur herself, and so the person that she's got in chatting to, that, as she mentioned, is also an entrepreneur. So what we try and do is we will often have people teaching some of the subjects like finance for entrepreneur, where it's very specialised. We'll have them actually be industry practitioners to start with, so you will get that industry experience right throughout the whole class. But in all of our subjects, as I was suggesting before, John, we do try and do this as much as we possibly can. We have a lot of links with, I don't know how many of you know about the CFA, Certified Financial Analysts, and we've got a lot of contacts with them, so we will often get people in from there as well to talk to us. I think it makes it, particularly in the master's programs, it makes it much better connection for you. You're already often working, you know where you want to be and where you want to head. And so this kind of link to the industry is really helpful. And people ask all sorts of questions of these industry practitioners, and they're all really helpful and really happy to chat with people. So it's worked really well for us for many years, I would suggest, the engagement. We do it for the undergraduates as well, not quite as much, but we certainly do that for the undergraduates too, John.
And do you think maybe with the asking, because sometimes people might almost get sort of, not starstruck, but a bit sort of in awe of senior business leaders. Do you think the ability to ask questions online as opposed to putting your hand up and going up and meeting somebody, is that a little bit easier for some students, do you think, in this environment, or is it about the same?
No, I think it is easier for some students. Some will find it much more comfortable to do that. And also, I guess the other advantage in a way is that we can have that one recording of that and everybody gets to see that. Whereas with some of our subjects, we will have a multiple of different classes during the week, some during the day, some at night, and each student only attends one a week, but this actually enables all of the students to benefit from the industry engagement. But I think we've got, I mean, there's a little chat room on this that we're using. Students like to do that. And also there's a little hand you can wave as well. So if you want to ask a question verbally, you can do that as well. So it works terrifically, I think.
And a question for you, Courtney, like how have you remained engaged? Like have you noticed that your learning is as strong? Are you using different tools to remain as engaged as you were before?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned just before was right. I feel like it's been a lot easier during class to contribute. It's a lot less intimidating to just type a message into the chat than it is to put your hand up and, you know, maybe say something in front of everyone. So I've found that I've really enjoyed that part of learning online this semester for sure.
And Hussein, have you noticed that students, I mean, obviously you've got the new Canvas tool and everything, but is it not so much just the tools that people are using, but the type of questions people are asking? Has it changed at all, or has it remained pretty constant?
I'm finding the questions to be much at a higher level, I would say, because my initial concern was that it may be related to technology use, but everyone seems to have adapted quite quickly. And I guess part of what we're doing is we tend to have less commuting and more time for reading. So there's a lot of application questions that are coming in, how we could apply the knowledge. So I'm finding the discussions to be at a much more detailed and practical level.
Excellent. Now moving on to the another section of learning, which is around assessment. Deborah, you were saying earlier that exams started this week for our students. How have they taken place during this remote period?
Oh, there's a massive range of different ways that the lecturers are assessing and always assess. There's always a range of different types of assessment that actually fits in best with the subjects. Some have been take-home exams or take-home assignments, so they've taken them home and have to hand them in just a couple of days later. So that makes it a fairly tight time frame, but it will be, you know, set so that it suits the students either over the weekend or during the week, whatever works best for them. Others have exams that are literally they get them in the morning and have to be, the exam effectively has to be completed and handed in the evening. We have other online ones that have invigilation systems. So you've got your camera. The invigilation system basically has a look at you, sees that you're the right person doing the actual exam, and then you do the exam online. So I had, I'm teaching in the undergrad at the moment, and I had a subject with 350 students on Tuesday afternoon doing that kind of an exam, and look, it worked really well, John. There are a few little hiccups with people's internet, but there's always a few little hiccups with people's internet, isn't there? But we had our IT people on, you know, speed dial, so it was pretty pleasing, I think.
And Courtney, have you had any sort of assessment period, like tasks you completed, and any dramas, any concerns, or is it pretty straightforward?
I haven't, it's been pretty straightforward. I haven't really had any dramas, but one assessment task that I had that was really interesting was instead of doing what would have been an in-class presentation, we each had to make a short video and submit that. And that was really fun. That was a really fun type of assessment that I think much more fun than, you know, the usual presenting in front of the class. So yeah, I really liked that type of assessment. It was good.
And Hussein, you've been doing a lot of assessment within your programs. Do you want to talk us through some of the methods of assessment that you've employed as well?
Absolutely. So as Deb said, the range of assessments that I use. In the subject that I teach, there is no final exam. So we have one individual assignment, as you can see, that's assessment 1, which is a group assignment. And then there are 2 individual assignments. With the group assignment, if we look at the next screen, what we did was we used Microsoft Teams. So on top of the screen, you can see different topics allocated to different groups. And at the second half of the screen that you can see is what's going on inside the team. So each group has their own little space to work in, which means they can share documents, they can edit it online. And we preferred Microsoft Teams rather than Google Docs because the accessibility of Microsoft Teams is throughout the world. And the university has a subscription base for all students and staff, so it works quite well. And you can see again, students weren't just chatting. You can see at the bottom of the screen, a video meeting just ended on that day. So again, students were engaging. That face-to-face, even in virtual situation, was something they preferred. And I'll just quickly talk about the next individual assignment, which is on the next screen. You can see that was covered during module 4, week 4. We went through all the documents, and part of what we provided was saying, here are the resources that are available. So you can see there's those research links for assessment 2, which on the next screen you can see is a whole list of them. And during the lecture, we go through the list and we explain what sort of data is available. And this is data that we provide, or access to data that students can have even after they finish from the university. So these are reliable sources with no need for any subscription. So it's something for the future can also be quite useful. Where we do find that students were finding it slightly difficult to get the data because, again, that after lecture, before lecture discussion that we would have, leaving the classroom is not always possible in a virtual situation. Students may give us feedback, and we would create some documents or create some videos. So if you go on the next slide, it's a very short video. And if you can play that video, it just shows you what we did was created this document or this video, and we said what we do is go on this website. If you want information about free trade agreements that Australia has, you would click on this button, click that next button, it opens up a new screen, it lists all the trade agreements, choose one that you are interested in, and it gives you all the details about it. So it's again a short video that we put up online to help with the assessment task as well.
Okay, so at some point in the future, you know, this whole lockdown will be over, and we'll be able to go back to face-to-face learning. What, Deborah, if I could ask you, what do you think you would continue to do once the lockdown is over?
A few things that I think have been really beneficial. I think a number of the things Courtney was talking about, doing a lot of group work with through Teams and those sort of things. I think we would try and encourage our students to use those more, because of course you can't be on campus all the time. I think that was a good thing. The other thing I think is having recordings of the classes for students to have a look at as well. In the undergraduate, we tend to normally record the big lectures, but we don't tend to record the tutorials. And I just think maybe that's been a good thing for us to be doing, because even though we want students, when we can do face-to-face, we want them to actually be in there so we can chat with them and those sort of things. We're also aware that sometimes you can't come every single time and every single week, but to have that ability to actually maybe sort of the next day, but effectively engage in a tutorial is really useful, I think.
And Courtney, what would you say, what would you sort of miss? What have you missed as a student that you just can't replicate online?
I think the only thing is really just that face-to-face connection. I think it's great online. I've really enjoyed it, but there is a little part missing, and that's the face-to-face interaction that you get. And like I feel like you get to know the people in your class a lot better when you're in a physical room with them. So that's the one thing I feel like you can't fully replicate online.
I was chatting to somebody the other day, said that unless you live pretty much upstairs from a barista or a cafe, even just having that ready access to coffee when you need it while you're studying can be a useful thing.
Totally.
Hussein, what do you think is the one takeaway from this that you found you'd like to continue once lockdown is over? So
look, the things like the Teams we're already using, but this time we used pre-recorded presentations, which I found got the groups more engaged. So perhaps in the future, rather than having a class presentation, we'd continue with things like the pre-recorded presentation and maybe have a poster session in class where people can have a quick look at it. So I think technology has actually brought out some new ideas for us that we can pursue further.
Thank you. Now, before we move on to the formal Q&A section, and for those of you with us, if you've got any questions, please put them into the Q&A. We've got a few already. Most of the people joining us are looking at starting in July. So I'll start with you, Deb. What's your number one tip for somebody who's thinking about studying in July?
I guess the main tip for me, and I'm thinking directly about the programs that I am involved with, but there's nothing lost by starting. Mm-hmm. So what you can do in most of the programs, so certainly in the program that Hussein's involved with as well, you can start with a graduate certificate, just do 4 subjects, see how you go, really effectively have a taster of it, and nothing lost because you come away with a graduate certificate. But it gives you an idea whether you can manage it, given your current working conditions and all of those sort of things. I just think, you know, honestly, it sounds a bit ridiculous, but have a go. Nothing lost.
Yeah. And what about you, Hussein?
I agree with Deb. What I would say is, look, all the subjects are very clear and structured. So don't wait till week 1. Some of that content is already available beforehand. So start early, plan for what you're going to do for the whole semester, and do feel comfortable to ask for help. That's what we're here for. So if at any point you feel like something's not clear or you're falling a bit behind, feel free to contact your lecturer and tutor and have a chat.
Excellent. And Courtney, your tip from the student perspective, what's your number one tip?
I think my number one tip would be to participate in class as much as you can. I think this applies to online as well as face-to-face classes, but the more you share ideas and ask questions, the more you contribute, the more you'll get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All righty, so we're going to move on to Q&A. What I might do at this point is I'm going to start my video just so people can see who's talking as well. One of the questions we've had is whether we've had any feedback from current students who've really struggled adapting to online delivery and who prefer in class. Have any of you, and I guess I'm referring this more to Hussein and Deborah, if you've had any of that feedback yet?
I've had a bit. So we've actually recently done a survey of students to try and get some feedback, you know, in a more formal way and more broadly than just some kind of one-on-one, which we've had mostly, to try and find out how they're going. And some really do struggle with it and find it difficult. And some of that will be in the situation at the moment around, do they have a good setup at home to be able to sit and do the class? Do they have family members wandering around, and, you know, do they maybe not have a particularly good spot or good internet? And I think it seems to be a lot of those sort of things that are the big issue for students. And I can see that that's a problem. And of course, you know, us saying go to a library or something, well, that wasn't really working either. But in normal circumstances, it would be. So I think as we move forward, the sort of issues that came up will not really be arising.
Stan, do you have anything to add to?
Not really. I think it's the same as Deb has mentioned. A few things we've noticed: people have gone back to their own countries in some cases. So we've got students connecting from Italy, some connecting from Indonesia. So the time difference also plays a part, the connections and so forth. But where there has been concern, we've tried to work through at the individual level with the student and provided them with more guidance and support. So that initially we had a few, but that gradually has not been an issue for us.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question which is a bit of an interesting one, which is around doing a PhD and wondering about distance, the availability of the option of doing distance with that. Is that something that either of you, Zane or Deb, can talk to? Because that's a little bit outside my area of expertise.
I'd say the best thing to do would be to contact business.research@uts.edu.au. They handle all the PhD inquiries from the business school, and they'd probably be in a position to address that. I'll type that up on the screen.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is possible for some parts of courses. I think it would make life a bit difficult, but I'm sure parts of it could be done from distance.
And just a final question, will there be any option to continue to study remotely in spring 2020, even if face-to-face teaching reconvenes? My understanding is that for 2020, certainly for spring, even if face-to-face teaching does resume, a lot of our international students won't be able to get back to Australia. So there will be the option to, the subjects will be taught remotely or online at least for the remainder of 2020. Is that your understanding, Deb?
Yeah, I think so. That's what we understand, that we'll be making available the online if we can do some in class possibly. But I mean, look, honestly, we don't know. I don't know about you, Hussein.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a crystal ball sort of thing with when face-to-face teaching will come back in, and obviously when it does, there are two elements to it. There's our capacity to teach face-to-face, but there's also the students' capacity or ability to, be in Australia and be in Sydney for that teaching as well. I think we've answered all of our questions. Do any of our panelists have any final last comments before we draw this session to a close?
No, not really. Just, think about where you want to be in 10 years. I always hate that question. I hate it when people ask me that. But it's not a bad way to sort of think about it. Where do you want to be? Would this be a good pathway for you? And that's what you've got to decide, and only you can decide ultimately on that. So good luck. Yeah.
Well, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our participants today, both the people in the audience and also my fellow panelists for joining us. Thank you so much for your time and expertise and everything. For people that are looking at commencing in spring, so a July intake, international students, if you haven't already applied, it's a little bit too late, so you'll be looking at potentially summer or autumn intake, so that's sort of November or March. But for domestic students, the application deadline is about 12 days from now, so don't leave it too long if you haven't already applied, to make sure that you get your application in. The sooner you apply, the sooner you get an offer, and then the sooner you can start locking in the subjects that you want to enroll in and all of those sorts of things. In the interim, if you have any questions regarding your next moves, please feel free to email business@uts.edu.au. That goes straight through to a team of people. If they don't know the answers, they know the people who do know the answers, and we'll help you in making this decision. Hopefully we'll be able to see a lot of you joining us in July, and at some point we'll be able to see you face to face. But whatever your decisions are in your next educational moves, we wish you the best of luck with them. And thank you very much once again for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.